President Biden delivered his first State of the Union address last night to a socially distanced but mostly mask-free audience. The president's hour-long speech touched on the economy and his plan to fight inflation, but front and center was Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Mr. Biden announced the U.S. is following Europe in closing its airspace to Russian commercial aircrafts. He expressed America's support of Ukraine while condemning Russian President Vladimir Putin for his actions.
Putin's latest attack on Ukraine was premeditated and totally unprovoked. He rejected repeated efforts at diplomacy. He thought the West and NATO wouldn't respond. He thought he could divide us at home, in this chamber, in this nation. He thought he could divide us in Europe as well. But Putin was wrong.
For more on the president's State of the Union address, Sarada Peri joins me now. She's a former speechwriter for President Obama. Sarada, welcome. Thanks for being with us. So as a former presidential speechwriter yourself, what stood out to you most from Mr. Biden's speech last night?
Well, as you just showed, I think the opening was incredibly strong and a really great way to show unity and to get the entire chamber standing. The other thing that really struck me was that, States of the Union are incredibly hard speeches to write. They're sort of a speech writing nightmare because they're the one chance that the president has to speak to the whole nation. And so within the White House, within the bureaucracy, everybody is trying to get their policies into your speech. And so it almost takes on a Christmas tree element. There's sort of so many ornaments you put on and the whole thing topples over from its own weight. In this case, I actually think that President Biden and his speechwriters just leaned into that, and they listed a whole bunch of policies and programs and things that are really popular with the American people, giving the sense of action and momentum. And at a time when polling shows that the president is unpopular for reasons that include people feeling like he's not doing enough for them, I think that this speech went a really long way to sort of obliterate that notion and make it clear that there is a lot of activity that he's doing.
Did we see the president move more to the center last night with his speech? He notably did not talk about Build Back Better, the January 6th investigation, voting rights. He did stay away from some of the most progressive agendas in his party. He even stressed he wants to fund the police, not defund them. He made a point of that. Why do you think that is? And do you think this slight shift was a smart move?
I don't actually think it was a shift. President Biden, along with almost every elected Democrat in Congress, doesn't support defunding the police. They never have. That is largely a Republican talking point. And even though, they've said that they don't support it, Republicans have sort of weaponized it. So instead, what I think he did was talk about the policies that are the most popular. So he emphasized things like lowering the cost of things that Americans, families are relying on, addressing inflation, focusing on manufacturing back in the United States, lowering childcare costs, prescription drugs. So I think what he was trying to do was focus on the things that are most popular and reach, and also talk about things that potentially some of the folks in Congress like Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema could get behind. So I think it was actually a pretty smart thing to do because you want to make sure that the American people are hearing that you're proposing policies that they support, which in this case they do.
Absolutely. But there were some progressives who were upset. For instance, he didn't spend more time talking about strengthening voting rights, for one.
Yeah, and I actually think that going forward, that's going to be sort of hopefully a bigger push. I think that the way that the problem was that, of course, the bill that he proposed in Congress didn't pass. And he did make a big deal about it a few weeks ago. Now, as he goes out into the country, leading up into the midterms, he's going to have to make this case. And it's not just a case about voting rights. It's actually something bigger than that. Republicans made a big performance last night about supporting democracy in Ukraine while they've been undermining democracy here at home. And so I think the case he's got to make going forward is that this fight against autocracy on behalf of democracy isn't just something that's happening elsewhere. It's happening right here at home. Republicans are still, the people in the chamber, still denying the results of the 2020 election, passing laws making it harder to vote, installing people who, didn't support the 2020 election results as secretaries of state. They're doing all kinds of things to undermine democracy, and they wouldn't even pass a voting rights bill. So I think that going forward, that's going to be the case to make. It was just a hard thing to do all of those things in the speech last night and get it to be, about an hour long, which he did manage to do.
Right. All right. And polling so far shows that most Americans were happy with the speech. Sarada Peri, former speechwriter for President Obama, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.